On the 24th of May, 1940, General Major Heinz Guderian positioned himself on high ground near the Arc Canal in northern France. Through the morning haze, field glasses raised to his eyes, he fixed his gaze on something that would trouble German military strategists for decades to come. Just 12 miles away, medieval walls and church spires pierced the sky above Dunkirk. His 19th Panzer Corps was poised at the threshold of what seemed like the greatest military triumph in German history. One final devastating blow, he believed, would shatter the trapped British expeditionary force and possibly end the entire war in Western Europe. Then came an order that transformed this moment of certain victory into one of history's most haunting what-ifs. The message arrived with shocking brevity. "Do not cross the canal." Guderian would later write in his memoir, Panzer Leader, that he stood speechless, describing this instant as having the most disastrous influence on the whole future course of the war. Behind him lay an astonishing trail of military achievements: the breakthrough at Sedan, the lightning race to the sea that had severed the Allied armies from one another, the nearly miraculous feat of reaching the English Channel in merely 10 days. Approximately 400,000 Allied soldiers now found themselves compressed against the coast, apparently at the mercy of German forces. Yet at this defining moment, with triumph seemingly within their grasp, the vast German military machine abruptly halted. This is how the Germans experienced Dunkirk, not as miraculous escape, but as victory squandered, as opportunity cast aside, as the psychological turning point that would reshape the entire conflict. It unfolds through the eyes of German soldiers, watching in frustration as ships spirited away an army they had defeated, through the testimonies of panzer commanders forced to hold their positions while their prey slipped away, through the reflections of veterans who would spend decades wrestling with what might have been. When German forces unleashed full Gelb on May 10, 1940, they represented the embodiment of revolutionary military thinking. Army Group A, commanded by General Oberst Gerd von Rundstedt, controlled the main striking force. Serving under Rundstedt were the 4th Army under Günther von Kluge, the 12th under Wilhelm List, and the 16th under Ernst Busch. But the true cutting edge was Panzer Group Kleist, containing the concentrated armor that would slice through French defenses like a knife through silk. The plan itself, conceived by General Lieutenant Erich von Manstein and championed by Hitler himself, called for the unexpected. While Army Group B under Fedor von Bock advanced into Holland and Belgium in what appeared to be a repeat of the 1914 Schlieffen Plan, the real knockout punch would come through the supposedly impenetrable Ardennes forest. Here, Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps would accomplish what many considered impossible. Guderian commanded 3 formidable divisions: the 1st Panzer Division under Friedrich Kirchner, the 2nd Panzer Division under Rudolf Feil, and the 10th Panzer Division under Ferdinand Schall. Running parallel to Guderian, General der Infanterie Hermann Holtz's 15th Corps advanced with 2 additional formations: the 5th Panzer Division and the 7th Panzer Division, commanded by an ambitious general named Erwin Rommel. Within days, Rommel's division earned the nickname Ghost Division for its uncanny ability to materialize precisely where it caused maximum disruption. The breakthrough came with stunning velocity. By May 13th, Guderian's forces had crossed the Meuse at Sedan, following a devastating Luftwaffe bombardment by Fliegerkorps VIII, under Wolfram von Richthofen, cousin of the legendary Red Baron. French defenses crumbled under the overwhelming combination of tanks, screaming dive bombers, and motorized infantry. Hans von Luck, commanding a reconnaissance battalion in Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, later recalled in his memoir Panzer Commander that his unit reached the Meuse in just 3 days, a pace that astonished even the Germans themselves. The secret to this breathtaking speed lay not merely in the tanks, but in an entirely new way of making war. Forward Luftwaffe liaison officers equipped with radios could summon Stuka dive bomber strikes within 45 minutes. The screaming Junkers 87s, their sirens wailing, shattered enemy morale before the panzers even arrived. It represented psychological warfare, wedded to mechanical precision. By May 20th, the impossible had become reality. Armored spearheads from the 2nd Panzer Division reached Noyelles-sur-Mer on the English Channel. In just 10 days, German forces had driven a corridor to the sea, slicing the Allied armies into separate, isolated fragments. The speed of advance had been so extraordinary that even Hitler expressed disbelief at his headquarters. Yet success carried its own terrible costs. Tank losses through mechanical breakdown and combat damage had mounted alarmingly. Some panzer units reported being down to 50% strength by May 21st. Supply lines stretched dangerously thin across hundreds of miles. Infantry divisions struggled desperately to maintain pace with the racing armor. Then came Arras. On May 21st, Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, advancing with confidence, suddenly found itself under ferocious attack by British tanks near Arras. The impact was immediate and profoundly shocking. Rommel's official war diary recorded the division's casualties as 89 killed, 116 wounded, and 173 missing, more losses than during the entire breakthrough up to that moment. Rommel himself was forced to personally direct anti-tank guns, later writing in his reports that he individually gave each gun its firing target. The psychological impact rippled through German high command. Kleist's headquarters grew deeply concerned about exposed flanks. Though the British attack was eventually repulsed, it had planted corrosive doubt in German minds. Were the panzers advancing too far ahead? Were they marching straight into a carefully prepared trap? By May 23rd, German forces held Boulogne and were besieging Lille. The entire British Expeditionary Force, the French First Army, and elements of the Belgian Army were crushed into a shrinking pocket with their backs to the sea. At German headquarters, the mood radiated triumph. Wehrmacht communications prepared announcements heralding the greatest annihilation battle of all time. On the evening of May 23, 1940, General Oberst Gerd von Rundstedt made a decision that would echo through history. Troubled by reports from his panzer commanders about significantly reduced tank strength, supply lines stretched to the breaking point, and the Arras attack demonstrating unexpected Allied capacity for organized resistance, Rundstedt issued a preliminary halt order. The next morning, Adolf Hitler arrived at Rundstedt's headquarters at Charleville-Mézières. According to Franz Halder's diary, Chief of the General Staff, at 12:42 on May 24th, the fateful order was transmitted. By order of the Führer, tank advances northwest of Arras are to be limited to the general line Lens-Bethune-Aire-Omer-Gravelines. The canal will not be crossed, Halder noted with visible frustration. The Führer is terribly nervous, afraid to take any chances. The order had multiple fathers. Rundstedt worried about his flanks and wanted infantry to catch up. Hitler, haunted by his First World War experience in Flanders, believed the marshy terrain surrounding Dunkirk unsuitable for tanks. But perhaps the most decisive voice came via telephone from Hermann Göring. The Reichsmarschall had promised that his Luftwaffe would annihilate the Dunkirk pocket from above. Why risk precious panzers when the Air Force could finish the job? The impact at the front was immediate and devastating. Guderian, whose 19th Panzer Corps sat within sight of Dunkirk, was furious. His 1st Panzer Division had already thrown bridging equipment across the canal. Some reconnaissance units had crossed. Now they were ordered to pull back and assume defensive positions. For 3 crucial days, German soldiers sat idle as the evacuation unfolded before their eyes. Through binoculars they watched as an armada began gathering off the French coast. Destroyers, passenger ferries, fishing boats, private yachts, anything capable of floating and carrying men. Wehrmacht war diaries from front-line units described the deep frustration. The 2nd Panzer Division's engineers spent May 25th building bridges over the canal system, preparing for the advance they assumed must surely come. Artillery units maintained harassment fire on the beaches and port. But the concentrated armor of the Wehrmacht, its true striking power, sat idle and growing restless. On the evening of May 26th, Hitler finally rescinded the halt order. But it would take another 16 hours for units to resume their advance. By then, the Allies had gained 4 irreplaceable days to organize defenses and begin Operation Dynamo in earnest. When German forces finally moved forward on May 27th, they found organized resistance instead of the chaos and disarray they had anticipated. Hermann Göring's assurance to Hitler that his Luftwaffe would destroy the Allied pocket represented one of the war's great miscalculations. The forces at his disposal seemed overwhelming. Luftflotte II under General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, and Luftflotte III under Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, with Flieger Korps 8, commanded by Wolfram von Richthofen, containing the Stuka dive bombers. In total, over 300 bombers and 555 fighters stood ready. May 27th marked Operation Dynamo's first full day and the Luftwaffe's concentrated attempt to fulfill Göring's promise. German squadrons attacked in wave after wave from 7 in the morning until dusk. Dunkirk harbour was set ablaze, the oil tanks creating black smoke visible for many miles. Yet Flieger Korps II's war diary would record unexpected resistance from RAF Fighter Command. Spitfires and Hurricanes operating from southern England engaged German formations repeatedly. The Luftwaffe lost 23 aircraft that first day alone. Among the losses were experienced crews that could not easily be replaced. The fundamental problem was endurance. The Messerschmitt Bf 109E, operating from Belgian bases, had barely 10 minutes over Dunkirk before fuel concerns forced them homeward. The Stukas, so devastating when protected by fighters, proved vulnerable to modern fighters when their escorts departed. Weather proved equally challenging. Of the 9 evacuation days, only 2.5 provided good flying conditions. On May 28th, clouds and smoke from burning oil obscured the targets. Kesselring protested to Göring that crews were exhausted after 2 weeks of intensive operations. The Luftwaffe's greatest success came on June 1st, when clearing weather allowed maximum effort. 4 destroyers were sunk along with other vessels. Yet by then, most of the British Expeditionary Force had already escaped. Despite flying 1,882 bombing sorties and 1,997 fighter sorties, the Luftwaffe had failed to prevent the evacuation. German pilot Joachim Münchberg of Jagdgeschwader 26 flew escort missions throughout the evacuation. His combat reports claim 5 Spitfires, including 4 on May 31st alone, earning him the Iron Cross First Class. Yet even this ace noted the intensity of British resistance and the challenges of operating at maximum range. When German ground forces resumed their advance on May 27th, they encountered transformed defences. The British had used their respite to establish a formidable perimeter along the canal lines. French forces, particularly the First Army, had begun their last stand, a desperate resistance that would tie down German divisions desperately needed elsewhere. The German 18th Corps War Diary describes the 56th Infantry Division advancing through flooded ground toward the Dunkirk perimeter, suffering heavy casualties from prepared British positions. The division became combat ineffective and had to be withdrawn. Research by Robert Kirchstein in Dunkirk, 1940, reveals there was virtually no coordinated plan to reduce the pocket. Units attacked piecemeal without coordination. Only 5 of 10 German divisions surrounding Dunkirk could operate effectively from dry ground due to extensive flooding. The siege of Lille proved particularly costly. 7 German divisions became embroiled in a 4-day battle against 40,000 French defenders. The garrison finally surrendered on May 31st, but their sacrifice had tied down forces that might have made the crucial difference at Dunkirk. General Weger, commanding German forces at Lille, noted in his after-action report that French resistance surpassed all expectations. German artillery observers documented extraordinary scenes on the beaches. Wehrmacht records describe long lines of men stretching from the dunes into the water, maintaining discipline even under intense fire. The sheer variety of vessels particularly struck observers. Everything from Royal Navy destroyers to former pleasure steamers, from fishing trawlers to private yachts. One divisional war diary observed, the enemy maintains remarkable order during evacuation. Small craft shuttle continuously between beach and large vessels, despite our artillery fire. The spontaneous mobilization of civilian vessels was completely unexpected by German military planners. General Ritter von Thoma, whose tanks sat immobilized by both orders and terrain, later testified he could see directly into Dunkirk through field glasses, watching British rearguard units conduct textbook fighting withdrawals. The professionalism of these supposedly defeated troops contradicted German propaganda about the weakness of democratic armies. German soldiers' letters preserved in the Bundesarchiv reveal complex reactions to Dunkirk. Initial confidence about imminent British surrender gradually gave way to uncertainty as Britain continued fighting. The masses of abandoned equipment, 2,472 guns, 84,427 vehicles, 657,566 tons of stores, according to Wehrmacht tallies, seemed to confirm the British Expeditionary Force's destruction as a fighting force. Yet Wehrmacht intelligence reports noted growing unease among troops. If defeated armies could escape so successfully, what might defending armies achieve? The psychological impact was particularly acute among units that had suffered unexpected casualties against British rearguards. The SS Totenkopf Division's massacre of British prisoners at Le Paradis on May 27th and Wehrmacht forces on May 28th reflected breakdown of discipline when faced with fiercer resistance than expected. These war crimes, documented in post-war trials, revealed the psychological strain on poorly trained units. Sönke Neitzel's analysis of German prisoner-of-war conversations, recorded secretly by British intelligence, reveals how deeply Dunkirk affected German military thinking. Veterans consistently described it as the missed opportunity when war could have been won decisively. Post-war German military studies identified Dunkirk as the pivotal point where strategic momentum shifted irreversibly. While Germany would achieve more victories, the opportunity for quick triumph had passed forever. Every subsequent campaign would be fought with Britain actively opposing and resisting. Franz Halder's diary provides the most detailed contemporary criticism of the Halt order. His May 24th entry noted Hitler was terribly nervous and afraid to take any chances. Halder had opposed the Halt, believing the Luftwaffe was fundamentally dependent upon favorable weather. Heinz Guderian's post-war memoir Panzer Leader identified the Halt as having the most disastrous influence on the war's entire course. His bitterness was thoroughly professional. His corps had been within striking distance of Dunkirk when stopped abruptly. Rundstedt's position evolved significantly over time. Initially supporting the Halt due to tank losses and dangerously overextended flanks, he later claimed it was entirely Hitler's decision. This claim, unsupported by contemporary evidence, became part of post-war mythology, shifting blame to the dead Führer. Hermann Göring never publicly admitted error, but the Luftwaffe's failure permanently damaged his standing. Internal Luftwaffe assessments highlighted fundamental problems: extreme range, weather dependency, and unexpected RAF effectiveness. Kesselring and Richthofen's after-action reports emphasized that their forces were exhausted after 2 weeks of intensive operations. The Luftwaffe lost between 156 and 240 aircraft during the evacuation, losses that would be acutely felt during the Battle of Britain. While attention focused on Dunkirk's beaches, 40,000 French soldiers conducted one of the war's most heroic stands at Lille. For 4 unrelenting days, they held 7 German divisions, including 3 armored divisions at bay. German military records reveal a grudging acknowledgement of French resilience in battle. General Weygand's troops endured heavy losses during the brutal street-to-street fighting, terrain where German forces discovered they lacked proper training and equipment. When the defensive position finally collapsed on May 31st, German soldiers performed the formal military salute, a remarkable gesture that spoke volumes about the respect they held for their adversaries' courage. Churchill would later observe that Lille's stubborn defense created the crucial window needed for roughly 100,000 more Allied troops to escape across the Channel. German intelligence grew frustrated watching French commanders exploit flooding to transform potential invasion routes into death traps. The French turned geography itself into a weapon, forcing attackers into converging fields of fire. The 68th Infantry Division continued repelling German advances as the evacuation accelerated inland. Wehrmacht war records documented something puzzling. French units maintained formation and discipline even after Belgium's capitulation on May 28th, left their entire flank dangerously exposed. German officers had anticipated French morale would crumble, but instead discovered strengthened resolve and determined resistance. When German soldiers entered Dunkirk after June 4th, they encountered an almost incomprehensible scene of abandoned materiel. Wehrmacht supply officers catalogued the staggering inventory: 2,472 artillery pieces, 84,427 vehicles, and 657,566 tons of ammunition and supplies. Propaganda film crews documented endless footage of the captured stockpiles. This material abundance would cloud German judgment. Leadership, observing such massive destruction and loss, concluded Britain's military capacity had been effectively shattered. The assessment shaped planning for Operation Sea Lion and bred dangerous assumptions about British weakness. By late May, German tank strength had eroded significantly through intense combat and breakdowns. Both Panzer III and I-4 models demonstrated mechanical fragility under prolonged operations. Some formations reported only half their armor still operational. This mechanical deterioration influenced the fateful Halt decision. With Case Red, the assault on remaining French forces still scheduled, preserving tank strength became critical. Every damaged or destroyed panzer represented irreplaceable capability needed for the Paris offensive. Wehrmacht intelligence had estimated perhaps 30,000 to 45,000 troops might manage escape by sea. The actual evacuation of over 330,000 Allied soldiers stood completely outside German planning parameters. German military doctrine centered on Kesselschlacht, the classic encirclement where surrounded forces surrendered. Maritime evacuation on this unprecedented scale exceeded Wehrmacht experience. The spontaneous civilian contribution, those small boats arriving from across the Channel, remained utterly unforeseen. German high command simply misread what was happening at Dunkirk's beaches. Hitler's June 5 proclamation announced the British expeditionary force destroyed. The mountains of abandoned equipment appeared to validate this claim. German invasion planners anticipated facing demoralized troops equipped with captured or improvised weaponry. Instead, rescued soldiers became the experienced core around which Britain rebuilt its military strength. The Dunkirk spirit that crystallized proved far more potent than Berlin's calculations had imagined. The crucial order originated from Hitler's Felsenest headquarters near Bad Münstereifel. Staff officers later recounted Hitler's dramatic mood swings. Initial euphoria at the breakthrough gradually gave way to increasing anxiety as panzer columns raced unchecked toward the coast. Hitler documented fears that triumph had arrived too easily, that unseen dangers awaited. This apprehension, rooted in his traumatic First World War service, influenced the momentous decision. The Halt order traveled directly from Hitler through military channels to frontline commanders. As the evacuation accelerated, headquarters received increasingly urgent reports of Allied forces escaping. Yet Hitler appeared unmoved, confident Britain would surrender. This strategic miscalculation would haunt Nazi Germany's future. Joseph Goebbels faced the difficult task of portraying hundreds of thousands of troops fleeing as a German victory. German newspapers emphasized conquered territory and captured material while downplaying the evacuation's magnitude. The Völkischer Beobachter declared this the greatest annihilation battle ever witnessed. The press maintained this convenient fiction consistently. The June 5 announcement highlighted prisoners and equipment seized while avoiding any reference to escaped forces. This divergence between official accounts and what frontline soldiers had observed created friction. Most German civilians remained ignorant of the evacuation's true scale. However, soldiers returning on leave gradually shared what they'd witnessed. Gestapo surveillance reports from summer 1940 document mounting public anxiety about prolonged warfare against Britain. The Luftwaffe's subsequent failure during the Battle of Britain and Operation Sea Lion's cancellation confirmed suspicions that opportunity had been squandered at Dunkirk. Allowing the BEF to escape fundamentally undermined German invasion preparation. Operation Sea Lion planners suddenly faced hundreds of thousands of experienced troops they'd assumed would be captives. Admiral Raeder pointed out that any nation capable of evacuating forces under fire could certainly defend against invasion attempts. The Luftwaffe's disappointing performance at Dunkirk raised serious questions about achieving air superiority essential for invasion. Wehrmacht analyses identified multiple problems revealed by Dunkirk. Britain's capacity to mobilize civilian resources, proven defensive tenacity, and naval superiority. These factors accelerated Sea Lion's eventual abandonment. Dunkirk's lasting consequence ensured Germany would face the two-front war its military desperately sought to prevent. Keeping Britain active in the conflict guaranteed eventual American participation and sustained Western pressure while fighting on the Eastern Front. German military professionals spent years analyzing why the Halt order had been issued. Staff reviews consistently identified it as the moment's strategic advantage shifted permanently away from Germany. Every subsequent campaign would encounter British opposition, coordinated Allied resistance, and see Britain serving as the staging ground for eventual invasion. Hans von Luck's reconnaissance battalion, leading Rommel's spearhead through Belgium, had reached the coast in just 3 days. In his memoir, Panzer Commander, von Luck described the anguish of watching evacuation efforts while receiving orders to stop. "We could not understand why we let so many escape," von Luck recalled. His reconnaissance troops, trained for exploitation and pursuit, remained motionless while enemy formations slipped away. The professional soldier recognized this as a strategic blunder, despite propaganda celebrating victory. Rommel's detailed after-action report, now in the Bundesarchiv, describes near disaster on May 21st. British Matilda tanks had slashed through his division's flanks with devastating effect. Rommel personally coordinated anti-tank defenses, repositioning 88mm flak guns in ground support roles to stabilize his position. This incident profoundly affected German command psychology. If 2 British battalions could inflict such damage, what devastating counter-offensive might coordinated British forces achieve? This worry reinforced the decision to halt and consolidate. Wehrmacht artillery spotters observed the evacuation unfolding through their rangefinders. Unit records described the beaches resembling disturbed anthills, with long files of soldiers maintaining formation despite fire. The diverse collection of vessels, from naval destroyers to civilian fishing boats, displayed British resourcefulness that German planners hadn't anticipated. Luftwaffe unit records detail the operational challenges confronting pilots. Jagdgeschwader 26's war diary notes the exhaustion of operating at extreme range. Pilots possessed only minutes over target zones before fuel reserves demanded return to base. Stuka units reported severe losses when fighter protection withdrew. Weather intelligence from Luftflotte 2 and 3 confirms that poor conditions dominated most of the evacuation period. Burning oil storage tanks generated dense smoke obscuring targets. Kesselring's complaints to Goering regarding crew fatigue received no sympathy. Joachim Müncheberg of JG-26 achieved significant status during Dunkirk, claiming multiple Spitfires destroyed. Yet his own combat reports acknowledged the surprising intensity of RAF resistance. British fighters appeared in far greater quantities than intelligence had predicted. The Luftwaffe's maximum effort on June 1st damaged several vessels but arrived too late. Most troops were already gone. Despite nearly 4,000 sorties flown, the Air Force had failed to deliver Goering's promises. Post-war interviews with German veterans consistently pointed to Dunkirk as the pivotal moment. In testimony given to the U.S. Army Historical Division, former Wehrmacht officers described it as when victory began slipping away. General Ritter von Thoma, later interviewed by Basil Liddell Hart, stated, "I stood out front near Berge. From that position I could observe everything unfolding at Dunkirk." His frustration at the restraining orders persisted even decades afterward. Military historians have thoroughly examined the Halt order. The official German history Deutsche Reich im Zweiten Weltkrieg identifies numerous contributing factors. Tank losses affecting supply lines, Hitler's nervousness, and Goering's optimistic assurances. Contemporary analysis emphasizes that while significant, the Halt order alone didn't determine evacuation success. French defensive stubbornness, British determination, and German exhaustion all shaped the outcome. Dunkirk's aftermath substantially altered German military thinking. Inability to prevent maritime evacuation prompted increased focus on coastal defense and anti-ship capabilities. However, these institutional lessons arrived too late to alter the conflict's trajectory. Wehrmacht staff studies between 1941 and 1945 repeatedly invoked Dunkirk as demonstrating incomplete victory's dangers. The ability of defeated forces to evacuate and fight subsequently challenged German doctrine, emphasizing total battlefield annihilation. Understanding Germany's Dunkirk perspective requires acknowledging the entire French campaign's human dimensions. German casualties during the Battle of France ranged between 120,000 and 160,000, a relatively modest toll for such overwhelming success, though including significant losses around Dunkirk itself. The evacuation figures tell their own compelling story. British forces escaped, 338,226. French and Belgian troops evacuated, 139,997. German prisoners taken at Dunkirk, approximately 40,000. Luftwaffe aircraft lost, 156 to 240. German equipment captured, minimal yet tactical advantages forfeited. These numbers represented an unusual victory, tactical triumph shadowed by strategic consequences that would prove catastrophic. The Halt order remains one of military history's most intensely studied decisions. Multiple factors converged: mechanical limitations, supply constraints, command hesitancy, inter-service friction, and profound misapprehension of enemy capabilities. German military institutions, reformed after the war, employed Dunkirk as a teaching case about incomplete victory's perils. Wehrmacht analysis concluded that political interference, service rivalry, and inability to comprehend enemy psychology had transmuted victory into eventual catastrophe. From Germany's perspective, Dunkirk represents history's most paradoxical military outcome: overwhelming tactical success containing seeds of strategic disaster. The Wehrmacht accomplished everything military science considered achievable: breakthrough, encirclement, rapid pursuit to the coast within weeks. They shattered Allied formations, conquered vast territories, and approached ending Western warfare. Yet in that decisive moment, through command uncertainty, inter-service competition, and fundamental misunderstanding of adversary determination, they permitted the nucleus of future Allied triumph to flee. The Halt Order, issued May 24–26, 1940, ranks among modern history's most consequential military decisions. Had panzers advanced, had Guderian received permission to complete the trap, had the Luftwaffe delivered its mission, World War II might have followed radically different paths. Britain, stripped of its professional army, might have negotiated settlement. America might never have discovered its European entrance point. The Soviet Union might have confronted Germany alone, with devastating implications for global history. Instead, Dunkirk became the turning point where German expansion crested and commenced its protracted decline. German soldiers witnessing the evacuation beheld, without fully recognizing, the moment when rapid victory transformed into prolonged defeat. They had achieved battlefield dominance while forfeiting strategic success, precisely the definition of a Pyrrhic triumph. German accounts preserved in unit diaries, official reports, and later testimonies illuminate how military mastery can coexist with strategic blindness. The Wehrmacht displayed tactical brilliance while overlooking war's political dimensions. They won engagements while losing the larger conflict, achieved operational victory while engineering strategic failure. For German soldiers standing on Dunkirk's perimeter during late May and early June 1940, future events remained obscure. They observed abandoned equipment, retreating opponents, and confirmation of German military supremacy. They could not imagine that their rapid victory's miracle would be eclipsed by the miracle of Allied escape, that soldiers boarding those disparate vessels would return 4 years hence as liberators and conquerors. Germany's Dunkirk perspective ultimately illuminates warfare's complicated nature. It simultaneously represented their greatest achievement and most catastrophic setback, demonstrated tactical superiority alongside strategic short-sightedness. The beaches where German soldiers once observed their fleeing adversaries became symbols of forfeited opportunity, an incomplete victory. The instant when war's trajectory, though still undetermined, commenced shifting irreversibly against German interests. Today, with witnesses departed into memory, their testimonies remain. They remind us that military events demand understanding from multiple viewpoints. Germany's Dunkirk perspective teaches that victory and defeat possess few absolutes, that operational triumph without strategic wisdom rings hollow, and that warfare's moral elements frequently overshadow purely military considerations. Germany's Dunkirk tragedy wasn't military failure. By conventional standards, they'd succeeded brilliantly. Their tragedy originated in failing to recognize that wars aren't won through battlefield supremacy alone, but through extinguishing an opponent's will to continue fighting. At Dunkirk, they destroyed an army's equipment while galvanizing a nation's determination. That evacuation, witnessed with such frustration by German soldiers, became the bedrock of British resistance, the foundation of the American partnership, and ultimately the staging ground for eventual liberation. For Germany, Dunkirk marked both military achievement's zenith and inevitable decline's commencement. Panzer commanders stationed idle along the Ruhr Canal, Luftwaffe pilots unable to stop the evacuation ships, infantrymen observing empty beaches, all unwitting participants in history's great inflection points. They'd won everything except what ultimately mattered, ending the war before it consumed their nation and continent. This represents Germany's Dunkirk perspective: military mastery that failed strategically, triumph ensuring defeat, achievement guaranteeing tragedy. German participant voices remind us Dunkirk was more than British salvation or evacuation. It was German catastrophe, an evaporation of strategic possibility that would never materialize. The Wehrmacht formations departing Dunkirk in June 1940 abandoned something beyond empty beaches and equipment. They left behind their optimal chance for rapid triumph, for restricted warfare, for avoiding the destruction consuming Germany and Europe. Archived accounts and remembered testimonies preserve the German perspective on Dunkirk as permanent historical record, a cautionary narrative about military power's limitations and incomplete victory's consequences. Ultimately, German Dunkirk experience illuminates that military history resists simplification, that victory and defeat interweave intricately, and that command decisions' ramifications extend far beyond immediate battlegrounds. German soldiers observing the evacuation occupy a unique historical position. Victors enabling their own defeat, conquerors preparing their own conquest, witnesses to tactical brilliance colliding with strategic blindness. Their narrative deserves preservation not to celebrate Wehrmacht accomplishment or excuse Nazi aggression, but to grasp the full intricacy of history's most consequential military operations. Germany's Dunkirk perspective teaches that victories harbor potential disasters' seeds, that military achievement without political judgment proves futile, and that historical comprehension demands examining events through diverse perspectives. Dunkirk's beaches, where German soldiers once stood frustrated watching enemies escape, remain a monument to war's contradictions. For Britain, they symbolize rescue and strength. For France, they represent sacrifice and abandonment. For Germany, they stand as eternal evidence of victory surrendered, triumph becoming tragedy, the moment when battle victory meant losing the war entirely.